Hello, everyone. Welcome to Or This. This is usually my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures and the sermon for the previous Sunday. However, I'm doing this on Wednesday because I did record a video earlier in the week, but then I decided I didn't like it. So I wanted to record a new video, and this is just when I so happened to have a chance to do that. But video is for October 8th. And the scriptures is, the 8th. Yes, the 8th. Scriptures for this week were Exodus 20, verses 1 through 4, 7 through 9, and 12 through 20. It is the listing of the Ten Commandments as found in Exodus. Psalm was Psalm 19. The second reading was Philippians chapter 1, verses 21 through 30, and the Gospel was Matthew 21, verses 33 through 46. Of course, I preached on the Gospel, but I do want to mention something about the reading from Exodus, and for that matter, Psalm 19, because I told you that the reading from Exodus is the listing of the Ten Commandments as found in the book of Exodus. That's all it is. Starts with, God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. That's how it begins. And then it ends with, there is the portion where it says, the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. Then they were afraid and stood at a distance and said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but don't let God speak to us or we're going to die. They were just a little bit afraid of all of that, what they were seeing. And Moses said, do not be afraid. God has only come to test you and to put the fear of him upon you so that you do not sin. In between there then are the Ten Commandments. And I'll talk about a little bit about that in a moment. But in case you didn't know, the scriptures are, there is some rhyme or reason to the scriptures and when they come up and which ones are put in. Like, we don't choose them. I don't choose them. Tim doesn't choose them. Barb doesn't choose them. We take them from a what's called a lectionary. So the lectionary was something that was put together years back by some faith leaders who came together and put it together. And the idea is it's a cycle of readings that have some rhyme or reason why they were chosen for those particular times, fitting into the different church seasons. But the hope is that in a 3-year cycle, we hear the majority of scripture covered in that time. There are some places of scripture that are not found in the lectionary at all. But basically, it's a 3-year cycle of readings. So I keep referring to the semi-continuous Old Testament series. It's that in that there was a choice of which Old Testament reading we could do over the summer into the fall. And the one series is called Complementary, and it goes along with the Gospel reading. The other was semi-continuous, and it was connected to itself in that it followed the story, a particular story through the Old Testament. But it does somewhat connect to the Gospel, but it was mainly put together in connection with the story that it was telling from week to week, as opposed to its relationship to the other scriptures for the day. With that, then, the Old Testament reading, there is also a psalm that is chosen to go with the Old Testament reading. The psalm is chosen based on what the Old Testament reading is about, and it is chosen as a response to the Old Testament reading. So there will always be a connection between the psalm and the Old Testament reading. And Psalm 19 is one of those that I'm familiar with, but if I was telling you about it, I might not remember that it was Psalm 19. The reason I'm familiar with it is because at the end of the psalm, it starts talking about the teaching of the Lord and it gives different metaphors for the teaching of the Lord in a way to make it so that it's understood as something that is positive. So the teaching of the Lord, in verse 7 of Psalm 19, it says, the teaching of the Lord is perfect and revives the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure and gives wisdom to the simple. The statutes of the Lord are just and rejoice the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear and gives light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean and endures forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, more than much fine gold, sweeter far than honey in the comb. And so you have that section where, again, it's these metaphors of how good the teachings and the ways of the Lord are for us. And what is that psalm in response to? The Ten Commandments. So there. So hopefully that's a little tidbit for you to pay attention to when you hear the scriptures each week. How do you hear the connection between the Old Testament reading and the psalm? Meanwhile, the Ten Commandments, something that most people know, are aware of, might be able to list all or some of, but just something I wanted to mention is that the Ten Commandments start out with 3 commandments that have to do with God. So the first is don't have other gods before the Lord your God. The second one is don't make idols. Don't make anything that is an idol that represents God. Or I don't think it's, not that it can't represent God, but don't make something else and worship it as God. Okay? God is God. We might have some things that help us worship God, but we shouldn't worship those things. We worship God. So don't have idols. Don't use the Lord's name in vain. And the last one is remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Keep it as a day, it's both a day of rest and a day to worship the Lord. So the commandments in the beginning have to do with the relationship to God. Now, these commandments are given to God's people after God has brought them out of slavery and is leading them through the wilderness to take them to a land where they can live and be free. So this is God's promise to God's people, that, okay, God has done all this for you. You are now my people. So my people, God's people, here's the way that you live as God's people, because here's what's important in the eyes of our God. So the first part is obviously worshiping God and having God in the appropriate place in our lives, and having the appropriate reverence and respect, that fear, but respect for God. But we got 6 more commandments after those first 4. Honor your father and your mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's stuff. So all of the rest of the commandments have to do with the relationship between ourselves and other people around us. In the gospel, in a couple different places, somebody asks Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and all your might. So that is that is found in Deuteronomy 6. It's called the Shema, and it is like the primary commandment that God gives God's people. Love the Lord your God with all that you are. Love the Lord your God. That is primary. Well, the first commandments in the 10 commandments have to do with that commandment, loving God. But Jesus then says, there's a second one that's very close to it, and it is to love your neighbor as yourself. And what does the last part, what do the last commandments in the 10 Commandments really have to do with? Living in relationship with one another. The whole of our lives of faith can be boiled down, first of all, to faith in God's love for us and faith that Christ died for us. But if we want to live out our faith in some way, it all has to do with loving God and loving those around us. Sounds simple. I'm not sure why we make it so difficult. Of course, we're not perfect either. So as human beings, we get mad at people and we get jealous and we get these feelings inside us that sometimes drive us to do things that we are not supposed to do, that drive us to do things that aren't good for ourselves or for other people. So, of course, we're not perfect beings. But when it comes to faith, here's the easiest way to understand it. It is about our relationship, number one, with God. But then the way that God relates to us informs the way that we relate to the people around us. I think that is a helpful way to look at the 10 Commandments and also to help us understand our life of faith. First, love God and know God's love for us. That's why we love God, because God first loved us. And then through the relationship with God, that is what helps us to love one another. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, either on the scriptures for this past Sunday, or on the video, or on the sermon, anything. Please feel free to share them in the comments. But hurry up, because it's almost the weekend, and there'll be another sermon coming along. All right, thank you so much for watching, and have a good rest of your week. God bless.